Okay, so now that we have gone over using grays as a way to effectively manipulate color temperature, we can also add hue to the mix as well. So I want to show you this really amazing thing that when I first understood it, it really changed the way I paint. And that is using hue shifts to convey form and not having to use that much value to actually show the form so that we can keep our value structure simple and very readable. Let me show you how this works, okay? So let's create a sphere. Here we have a simple sphere, okay? And now let's light it. Let's give it a top lighting that is cool. And you'll see me do this all the time. And let's give it a bottom plane, which is, let's make the bottom plane warm, okay? So here we have this cool and warm planes that when you zoom out, you can really understand the form, right? And let me add a little shadow to it as well. I'm gonna add the shadow. I'm gonna make the shadow a little bit darker. What I've done here is I have utilized mostly hue to convey form rather than having to go really bright up here for the lights or really dark down here. Okay, so when we actually pick the colors and we put them next to each other, they're actually the exact same value. As you can see, when we toggle grayscale on, we can see that the values are essentially exactly the same. Okay, now this is an interesting thing, right? Because this shows you just how much you can get away with just using color alone. Instead of having to always deploy new values and always have to add a new value to show form, you can oftentimes just use a new hue and color instead, right? And this is super helpful because this means that you don't need that much value contrast when you wanted to convey form effectively. Okay, let's look at an example of this and how I have personally applied this idea in my paintings. Okay, so this painting right here, it's a portrait. I have done something that I think it's very appealing, which is grouping this entire shadow into a single value. As you can see on the right, the values and the shadows are actually just one value. Okay? Very cohesive and very unified. Very simple read. When you zoom out, you read this two value, light and shadow, right? Now, how do I show form in the shadow then? If you only have one value. Again, as I mentioned, this is where the hue comes in. So as you can see, there's a lot of different hues on the face, on the head, and the chin is getting this very bright, sort of very vibrant orange, warm color beneath, and also right here on the cheekbones that is facing up, you can see that I have coated it with like a cool color, right? So that the form is essentially being conveyed with that temperature shift. So I did not need to add any value change really in this case. And that has allowed me to really keep this simple value structure, right? And again, remember value is everything. So value is the foundation of your design. Your picture is very much relied on value design and this simple read, and it's very easy to muddy values up if you're not careful, right? So this is a really good tool to make sure your values are groups, like your value groups are separated and not muddied up because of this idea of temperature. So if we look at this right here, you can see clearly this has been thought of as a three value structure, and this whole painting is essentially comprised of three values. This is how I've started the painting, as we now should know how to do. And this is how I go about putting extra information on top of that with color. As you can see, the color, the form, the planes, they're all being conveyed through all these color and temperature shifts, right? So it's very subtle, right? But it's very effective. So here we have another example of another one of my paintings. I have done the same thing here as well. So for the face, I've clearly grouped all this in one value, except where the light hits. So it's a 2-value scheme for the face, essentially, right? So when you zoom out, the read feels very clear, and the light hitting the face feels very just obvious and not muddied in a value sense. So how did I conceptualize this face, right? Well, I essentially thought about the big forms, as you know, and I thought about the planes that face down receiving warm light and planes facing up receiving a cool light, right? And this is a simple color logic, right? But it's super effective. If I were to do a little lighting setup here in the bottom, it would be something like this, right? And then if we want to add the light hitting it, this is essentially what's going on with the face right here, as you can see. So you have the strong light, you have this cool up-facing planes and warm bottom-facing planes, right? And that is simple but effective way to make sure you don't muddy up your value schemes. You know, there's such thing as over-rendering, right? I see it oftentimes when people put too much value contrast when there should be very subtle contrast, right? And this is one way that is to make sure you don't do that. So what you're doing is essentially taking a form, right? Any form, a sphere, it could be a cylinder or a cube, right? And you are actually just coding the different planes with different color, okay? And making sure that the silhouette conveys that form that you're going for. See how I'm erasing out? And here, same thing, right? See, you really do not need to make much of a value change. You really don't need to go this dark, right? To convey that this form is a sphere. And this is something you'll see a lot in overcast scenarios, which we'll get into a bit as well. And here, as you can see, it's super effective. So it's like every plane that you see, you're assigning a color to it. I'm assigning these planes warmer colors, and these planes cooler colors, and the top planes even cooler colors, okay? And that just works really well. And notice how they all stay. When you turn on grayscale mode, notice how close these values are. See, these values are really close together. This is essentially the same. And this is essentially the same as well. All the different planes are so close. Barely any difference. But yet, when you turn on color mode, look how vibrant and look how much that form just pops out and reads. Right? So I implore you to analyze this concept in other people's work, because master painters have used this for such a long time, and this is one of my personal favorite tools. Okay, so this is like such an amazing tool, and I cannot recommend it enough. Okay, so before I forget, I want to make sure everyone knows how to use the Photoshop tool to turn something into grayscale. So here I go to View and Proof Setup, and then I click Custom. And then when this pops up, I make sure that it is on dot gain 20%. Okay, and then I click OK. And then the shortcut for that should be Control Y by default in Photoshop. For those of you who use Photoshop as your primary digital software.